Get us started. Hello, everyone. And again, welcome to Artwork Archives, Preserving Black Artists' Legacies. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Elysian McKolgemeyer, and I am the head of growth at Artwork Archive. I'll be serving as moderator today. Just want to mention my pronouns are she and her. And for those that may be visually impaired, I am a fair-skinned redhead wearing a brown shirt, sitting in front of a blurred background in my office. I am located in Denver, Colorado, where the Artwork Archive team is. I want to acknowledge that I am on the traditional territory of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations. A few things before we get started, a few housekeeping items. This webinar, first and foremost, is being recorded, and it will be shared tomorrow to all registrants via email. We have saved time for questions at the end of the presentation, so please submit your questions via the Q&A icon, which will be at the bottom of your screen. And if you aren't on an iPad, you may have to click 3 little dots to pull it up. Everyone's been introducing themselves in the chat. Thank you for doing that. If you have any technical support needs, please place it in the chat. My teammate Cassidy is here to help. We would love all questions to be within the Q&A icon so that we can keep them compiled and run through them at the end of the presentation in an orderly way. And lastly, if you need access to captioning, you can click live transcript on the bottom of your panel and then select show subtitle. The automated transcript is available to those on Zoom desktop or the Zoom mobile app and is available if you're on the 5.0.2 version or higher. So with that, provided my little brief intro, but I would love to take a moment to introduce our incredible panel today. First, I'll introduce Manuelita Brown. She specializes in bronze, figurative, and portrait sculptures, commemorating great people and celebrating the significance of ordinary people. Her sculptures are intended to elicit an emotional response. She wants you to relate to the humanity of her subjects and to recognize that you are part of the same human family. All too often today, a person subconsciously views another with suspicion or fear based on skin color, faith, or language, sometimes resulting in harm and even death. She creates sculptures intended to elicit compassion and a sense of common humanity, of identification with the other. Manuelita began her professional art practice after a career as a mathematics educator in secondary school and university classrooms. Thank you, Manuelita, for joining us today. Keisha Dumas Heath is Executive Director of the nonprofit Museum of African American Art in Los Angeles, where she manages operations, communications, member engagement, visitor experience, community outreach programs, and fund development. Prior to taking on the role of Executive Director in 2020, Keisha was a longtime member of the Board of Directors for the Museum of African American Art in LA, and she curated the museum's first ever online exhibitions on the Google Arts and Culture platform. Keisha has served on the Board of Directors for 2 statewide advocacy organizations, California Association of Museums and Californians for the Arts. Keisha holds a bachelor's degree in English and a master's degree in African American literature from Howard University, and she is alumna of the Getty Merrill Multicultural Internship Program. And when she gets into her speaking roles, she will also share more about the museum that she represents. And our third panelist, Charlie Palmer. Charlie Palmer is known for saying art should change the temperature in a room. And for more than 30 years, his art has spoken for itself. In every painting, Palmer bears witness to African ancestry and contemporary experiences, rhythmic, visual stories that shift what each viewer believes. As a fine artist who paints upwards of 50 paintings a year, he has an innate awareness of documenting the intersection of creative expression and the Black experience and accepting the guidance of his ancestors. He creates, authors, and magnifies the truth and depth of Blackness. Palmer was selected by John Legend in 2020 to create a cover portrait for his Grammy Award-winning Bigger Love album, which is shown on the right-hand side of the slide. He was also commissioned by Time magazine to create the cover art and illustrations for their America Must Change July 2020 edition, based on his 20 years experience painting on the subject of race. And briefly, who is Artwork Archive, or rather, what is Artwork Archive, the host of this webinar? For those new to us, Artwork Archive is an online art collection management system used by artists, individual collectors, and organizations to organize, manage, and share their artwork and collections. As the daughter of artists, art therapists, and art educators, I am so lucky to be able to work with amazing artists and institutions every day, and to have the opportunity to craft educational opportunities like our free webinars and articles that we present today. So speaking of today, what are we going to discuss? This is just a draft of our roadmap of what we will be speaking to when it comes to preserving Black artists' legacies, asking our panelists what legacy means to them, how they are preserving their legacy and why, what challenges they face within the act of that, and then to spotlight what collecting institutions like the Museum of African American Art in LA are doing when thinking about preserving the stories, the artworks, the narratives, the experiences of Black artists. So the first question to our panelists, what does legacy mean to you? And so with that, I'm going to mute myself and let our wonderful panelists jump in.
You know, I don't want to start because I really believe it. I mean, it should be ladies first. I mean, I could jump in at any point, but please, ladies, if you have something to say.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm hesitant because I think of legacy in terms of my artwork itself, and I'm learning to broaden that meaning of legacy based on what I've been learning through working with Artwork Archives. My sculptures are in bronze. I particularly like that medium because it will be here in centuries from now. And so I see my legacy as leaving artwork that will relate to people or have people relate to who we are and who we have been when they see this in 2 centuries from now, that we will still have a meaning in someone else's life, or it will still speak to people generations in the future. And that's where I see my legacy, but I'm beginning to learn that there's more to it than that. And I'm learning that from listening to Charlie and to Keisha.
Thank you. That's beautiful.
Hi, everyone. So what does legacy mean to us, the Museum of African American Art, as an institution? I think that legacy and the preservation of legacy, of course, is central to our mission as a museum. It's what we do. And so as an institution, the Museum of African American Art is documenting our history of documenting to some extent. The museum's legacy always leads us back to individual artists. And so that's individual artists in the past, so individual artists then and now. And our institutional memory, which is how we're communicating that legacy, really centers around the artists who have been connected to the museum through different points in time. You're looking right now at an image of Dr. Samela Lewis, who's the founder of the Museum of African American Art. She founded the museum as a nonprofit in 1976, and that image actually came from our 40th anniversary program book that we issued as part of that commemoration. And she was one of the honorees in 2016. And that's the image that we had from the program book when we celebrated that milestone. And so our way of communicating and continuing the legacy that Dr. Samela Lewis started is really centered around preserving the work and documenting the work of artists, local artists now. Our exhibits that we have now and the exhibits that we will have coming forward, as well as looking and taking a deeper dive into the museum's archives and making sure that the existing documentation from the time when Dr. Samela Lewis and her very close colleague, Mary Jane Hewitt, from the time when they were there, those archives are still there. Those files on those individual artists who are in the early days of the museum, those are still there, but they're not digitized. And so we're doing the work of getting those into a format that we can share. And so that's our way of preserving things into the future, changing the way that we share that information.
Thank you, Keisha. Charlie,
And so, like what a perfect place to start. Samela Lewis, who we've lost, one of our legends that we recently lost, but the fact that what I want to do as an artist is to leave that kind of legacy. I am here because there was a Samela who not only documented, but she was a strong advocate. She worked to build institutions. She produced wonderful books on African-American art, so that there are these things that we can reference for the rest of our lives. I would hope my art will last past my life, but I think it becomes important in our legacy to have documents, to have records, to have proof and stories. And Samela was very instrumental in that, in playing such a major role, not only a fabulous artist, and her career itself stood almost a century. And so I think it's beautiful to think that we start this conversation on an image of her, because what she gave will live forever. And I would hope, and it's also my role, as long as I'm here, to tell that story, so that the generation that's coming behind me will also know who Samela is and know why she's significant, and why she's significant not only as an artist, but as someone who worked very hard and was very intentional in her actions to produce places that we could go and see and appreciate art produced by African Americans, but also that she has these books. So the legacy is important because it's our way to live forever.
Thank you. And here I was showing a screenshot of you, Charlie,
Yeah.
work with with a younger generation. And before getting into, the next question, which actually, you all were touching upon as well, just echoing, when speaking of legacy, Manuelita started off with, it's not just the artworks, it's it's artists' stories, experiences. And when thinking about legacy, the today, but also the generations of tomorrow, and what they will know about the artist's work and experience. And so to continue the conversation, why are you preserving your legacy? Why are you taking actionable steps against that today?
Well, since I'm not going to have very much to say about that part, because I've not done very much to preserve a legacy beyond the work itself. But I'm learning that the story that I should tell about the creation of the work and why I create the work is probably equally as important. I've been seeing a few other artists who are getting their stories in print, and I particularly enjoy reading them, and they're inspiring to me. And so I'm being told, and I'm beginning to believe it, that I need to do the same thing, because people are living longer. Let's put it this way. We're healthier and living longer. And the chances of having one career and living that till the end of your life is unlikely. I have had a full career as a mathematics educator. And now I'm in the midst of a full career as an artist. And how did I make the transition and why? That I'm understanding could be inspirational to a lot of people in their 40s and 50s who are trying to figure out what's next. So why am I going to do something about it, as opposed to why am I doing something about it? And it means that I will need to find strategies to get that done.
Manolita, do you mind me asking a follow-up question of one question we ask often of artists when considering legacy is, how do you want to be remembered? So 50, 100 years from now, when someone is picking up a book about Manolita or looking at your website or walking past one of your amazing sculptures out in the public realm, what do you want people to feel or know?
What do I want them to feel in general, or what do I want them to feel about me? I'll ask
let's start with the impact of the art, and then you, yeah, because you are important as well.
Well, what do I want them to feel if they are viewing the artwork or learning about the artwork is the connection to what these other people have done. When I do a sculpture of Harriet Tubman or Sojourner Truth or anyone else, I want them to know that that person was a human being just like they are, and the potential that they have equals the potential that these other celebrated people had, and that they should not be afraid to step out and make a difference in the world. So that's the kind of thing I want them to feel when they see the sculpture. When I do sculptures of people who are just ordinary people, like the cleaning lady who's over my shoulder, then I want them to know how significant that person is in the lives of every person that she touches or that he touches if he's doing something. I grew up the daughter of a taxi driver in Washington, D.C. And the taxi driver is not necessarily thought of as an important person in the world, but to the families that whose daughters he took to ballet class, or whom he picked up and took the kids on travels to museums or to the park, or even the people that he just took to work every day. Because at the time when he was a cab driver, it was more like he had some customers who were the same customers every week or every day. And so he was an important part of their lives, not just an important part of my life because I was his daughter, but because he was important in the everyday lives of the people that he came in contact with. So I want them to look at the sculpture and know that they're looking at people who are significant in the world, whatever their position is, whatever the tasks that they do every day, they're still significant in the world. And it makes a big difference. Then if this book gets done, let's think positively, and they're learning about me, then I want them to think about how they might transform their lives, how they might respect their accomplishments and still not rest on their laurels, as you might say, that they keep moving forward and that they know that there's still contributions to make. As long as they're still taking breaths, there's still contributions to make.
Thank you. And I know that wasn't one of the seeded questions, so thank you for speaking so honestly and openly in response to that. Charlie and Keisha, I want to make sure that you have time as well to address this question.
My answer, my response is pretty brief and direct on that. What we are preserving our legacy as an institution so that we can continue to work on behalf of artists and their work in the community. So we're preserving our legacy as a museum in order to continue doing the work that's central to our mission, and that is supporting the arts and artists in our community. and educating the public about the work that those artists do and have done over time.
Thank you, Keisha.
You know, it's very easy as an artist to have a huge ego and to really think that everything is about you. And so I've tried very hard to remain as humble as possible. But at the same time, I realize that being humble doesn't serve me, and it doesn't serve the community. And so I know I have to at times step forward and be a leader, and at this point in my life also be an elder, to reach out and to teach the next generation. It's very important to me when it comes to my legacy at this point. One of the things that I do, and some people don't know about, is I do children books. And I emphasize that what I focus on is stories about Black people and Black children. And I would love for my legacy to be something connected to I inspired the next generation on some kind of level. Just as a snowy day when I was 5 years old and I saw it for the first time, and I looked at it over and over again. I wore that book out, and because it was someone who looked like me, I think that I want to be remembered as someone who made a difference. And it's important and very intentional in this part of my life to make a difference, to be conscious about it, to be selective about, because my time is limited, my time is valuable. And so having a legacy becomes important because I now see, not from a selfish standpoint, but how it literally can make the difference and make a change for someone else. And so, and why it's important and why, and what would be my legacy, it would be everything. It would be that, and I enjoy doing what I do. But like Manuela said, which I love, is that everybody's got the story. And like when you talk to someone and you hear their story, you realize there is no one route to becoming an artist. You know, and Keisha mentioning, like when you read her bio early on, and I didn't hear art being mentioned in her initial, and I'm like, so now there's a story there. How did you get there? How did you get to the point where you're representing this museum? And I know the role you play is very important. And so there's a story there. And so everybody has a story, and it helps people understand, as I've discovered over and over again, if you're still breathing and living, and if you can still hold your hands up, and maybe even not hold your hands up, you can always pursue your dreams. And so many people tell that story about how they started pursuing their dream as an artist way after their first career was over with.
Yeah. Thank you. What a way to encapsulate, this question, everyone's contribution. And I thank you for everything that you shared, Charlie. It was, it actually leads us to a quote that I included for this webinar about crafting your legacy as an artist, but also as an arts administrator or as a person, thinking about beyond just the things that you are producing, but the stories, how you make people feel, the processes, the inspirations. And this quote is from Mark Leach. He's a curator and author of Crafting Your Legacy, which was in partnership with Surf Plus, which is listed at the bottom of the quote, a really great resource for artists for preserving and safeguarding your studios and your works. And he read or wrote or said, that's the word I'm looking for. Vision, technique, process, they are all essential to understanding an artist's lifetime and legacy. Authentic artistic legacy is reflected in and through an artist's actions, words, and thought. Together, these provide the public with a close sense of the artist's peculiarities of style, technique, and influences. And I didn't want a bunch of words on a slide, but he also said, in addition to that, within an article that we wrote at Artwork Archive together, legacy making should be as personal and creative as art making. It affords artists a chance to think holistically about all of the dimensions of a visual arts career and tell their full artistic story, right? And so I think that I just wanted to leave those words to echo everything that you all have been sharing about the importance of recording and sharing out your story and experiences for today's public and future generations. And Keisha, I pulled a screenshot from your Artwork Archive account, thought that this image and object that you have documented might play to that, if you would like to speak to it.
Thank you. So one of the things that we've been doing as we document the institution's history and the ways that our history as a museum intersects with the work of artists is looking at some of the images and some of even the logos that we've been using, and how those have developed over time and what their connections are to artists. And so this image is showing a side by side. On the left is showing the commemorative painting that was done for the museum's 40th anniversary in 2016 by Cynthia St. James, who's probably best known as the artist who created the first ever Kwanzaa stamp in 1997 for the U.S. Postal Service. She does a lot of wonderful, iconic work for nonprofit organizations across the country, really. And so she did that piece for the museum's 40th anniversary. And if you look at the piece, that you'll see probably pretty immediately that the museum's more recent logo is on that red shopping bag or tote bag that the lady in purple has, right kind of in the middle. So it says the Museum of African American Art. But if you look, they're in a gallery. They're in the Museum of African American Art, let's say. And in the very top, you can see the background of what the artwork is on the walls there that they're looking at in that commemorative piece. And at the upper left area of that, the one of the left of the two paintings is actually one that honors the museum's founder. So it is a representation of the founder's work that is shown on the right. That is Woman in the Field by Dr. Samela Lewis in 1995. And so there's that reference. And part of the effort that we're in when we look at preservation and we look at documentation as a kind of storytelling, part of what we're doing when we make those choices about what to show and how to show is showing things in ways that help other people make connections, showing things in ways, documenting things in ways, presenting things in ways that help people learn what those connections are and what those references are, and how those images and those artists are then in turn connected to the Museum of African American Art and our history as an institution.
Thanks, Keisha. And Charlie, when we were planning this presentation and speaking about preserving Black artistic legacies, you mentioned Black season. And so when we talk about the why preserving legacy, when we talk about today and tomorrow and about yesterday, this slide has an opportunity for panelists to speak to that.
You want me to address it a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm glad you brought that up. A friend of mine said this a few months back when we were talking about getting funding for a couple of events. And he said to me that Black season is almost over with. What he was saying was that after the murder of George Floyd, suddenly corporations wanted to step up and give something to show that they cared. What they were doing more than anything is just recognizing that Black folks are a valued customer, and that there's been a lot of injustice in the world, and there's a need to step up and back us and help us, support us in some form. And so we're at a point where a lot of these corporations are starting to go away as if it's all over with. The struggle continues. The museums, I just read an article today about how much the funding going to HBCUs have dropped considerably in the last year or two since Biden's been in office. And it's like, those schools are still there and they still need help. And so it's like these corporations need to continue to make a commitment to help. And I had the pleasure of working at Fisk University for a year. And a dear friend of mine over there is the curator. His name is Jamal Sheets, Dr. Jamal Sheets. And they have an incredible collection over there. But that collection needs to be maintained, and maintained by more than just him, but volunteers, but also paid staff that can come in that are trained to preserve this legacy. And so I think it's important that companies start to recognize that we're here, and not that we're asking ever for a handout, we're asking to get an equal acknowledgement as well as equal aid, and helping us to further the thing that we've tried to do to make things more equal. And so Black Season, when I say that, it's just that it seemed like for a period of 2 years, there was a step up, and now it's slowly stepping down. And so we're doing everything we can and make every effort to say, acknowledge us and help us to continue to develop when it comes to the legacy of art and the legacy of education, and anything else that the opportunities for jobs and everything. It's like, how do we be more intentional about effectively making change, making differences?
Yeah. Thank you. And I'm curious to know, to those that are watching, how you feel in response to that, if you are feeling that seasonality and the diminishing factor. So feel free to contribute to the chat. We'd love to hear about those that are living the experience day to day. And when speaking about today and tomorrow, again, when we were planning this session and we gathered together on Zoom, Keisha, you had a really great example that spoke to Manuelita's experience, for example. And so I put it into a slide to emphasize the why, to why artists should be documenting their artworks, their careers, their processes, why institutions, collectors should be documenting it and saving it. And so it's a bunch of words, but Keisha, do you want to just run through that case study, within your seat as an executive director of a museum, using Manuelita as an example?
Thank you. That's very formal. We were having just a conversation. I didn't know it was a case study. It's now a case study.
I should probably be naming that.
Wonderful. And so we were talking about for individual artists, why go through the work of documenting what you do as an artist, and what your methods are as an artist, and what your inspirations are as an artist. Why write that book, to use Manuelita's example of wanting to write a book and thinking about writing a book, and we're saying, do it, write the book. One of the things that we're looking at and kind of acknowledging as an institution at the Museum of African American Art is that when we preserve, when we document, when we help artists in the community document their work, it gives us a chance to, and I'm going to get in some trouble for this, but it gives us a chance to do a little less curating, okay? Do a little less speaking and selecting on behalf of artists, and just put the artists' own voices forward, and continue to be a space where people know they can come and do that. And so that was where that encouragement was coming from in that conversation with Manuelita, was just that many years from now, if someone were to approach the Museum of African American Art, as they do, we get research requests, we get all kinds of inquiries into the lives and the works of artists, whose works may or may not be in our permanent collection, but we may have files. If they ever did an exhibit, we may have files still about them. But that we want to encourage artists to document their own processes, document their own work, so that we as institutions can do a better job of directing researchers and directing authors, directing scholars and visitors and other folks to look at the artist's own words. Look at what the artist put forward, him or herself, and to go back to those primary sources, you know, the words that the artists have used about their own work, the documentation that the artists have put forward about their own work, to use that as the primary source, as opposed to always coming to the institution, you know, for that kind of interpretation on their behalf. Go to the artist's own content first, if it's there, if it's documented, and that's why we do want it to be there and be documented moving forward.
Agreed. And that's, you know, a lot of what we do at Artwork Archive, since we're an art inventory management system, is helping artists get everything organized, their artworks, you know, information about title, creation date, medium, but also the narratives and the documents, the inspirations, everything that I've been sharing earlier, because when the artist is no longer around, who's going to speak for you and speak to your artworks? And so ensuring that there is documentation and wishes for how your artwork will be represented, shown, sold, etc. Charlie.
Yeah, and I think there's, I mean, sadly, and I'm a victim of that to a certain degree, is the ignorance of not understanding how important it is to keep great records. And like, fortunately, I'm married to someone who's a professor, who's an archivist, who informed me that I live in a city that holds the papers of Samela Lewis and holds the papers of other well-known people. And prior to talking to her, I was unaware that papers existed for everybody. I thought they were scattered everywhere, and that people make, especially even in their wills, sometimes they make a clear statement of where they want all their information to be housed. Because if you can imagine anyone that would want to in the future write a story about one of these artists that they really admire and appreciate, and there's so many who've gone now that we can't go to one place, one source, and find that material. You know, so now I, again, being intentional, I'm working on making sure that my papers will all be together, all my information. If anybody ever wants to know, it'll be in one place when I'm no longer here. But I think that what Artwork Archive has done from the very beginning, because it seems in so many ways to me, and it sounds like a commercial right now, I apologize for that, it made everything I was trying to do easier. It was all there. Like, I remember the conversation we had last week or the week before, and I said, it would be great if you guys could do this. And you're like, we already have that in place. And I'm like, okay, I need to go back and find out what all you have, because yes, I now know where most of my material is when it comes to my art. And when we were talking about date, size, even price, sometimes it's all bio, it's all there and it's available. And that's a great resource to have. And so I think artists need to, and I think there needs to be more workshops and conversations with artists about how important it is, because it's not about being self-indulgent or focused on self as an artist. It is actually being generous to share the techniques, style, your experience, even acknowledging, in my case, maybe I can help the teacher that taught me early on to live longer in my story, because there are teachers, and my high school teachers, that made a difference, and they're no longer here. But it's like, in my story, I can acknowledge them and keep their legacy alive.
I love that, and actually that segues to the next part of the conversation, is the how, right? And so it's great to talk about, you know, the importance of, but the day-to-day, and that you are doing that work, Charlie, and documenting your own stories, your own works, but also the influences of others. Manuelita sharing that, you know, she's going to do more from the conversation. And I know that, you know, one of the reasons why we're having this chat, and Artwork Archive does have other presentations about the importance of inventorying your artwork, how to preserve your legacy, how to document your art business, and sharing it with those that are, you know, in the more mature stages of their career. They may be working off of paper, but also getting it in the hands of students, art students, and thinking about not something 20 years from now, but staying on top of it right now, so it doesn't turn out to be this overwhelming project, 5 decades from now. And I like to joke that, your archive, keep up with it like flossing. Otherwise, that dentist trip is going to be really painful, or getting. But if you are in that phase as an artist who is sitting here, or an art collector, your narrative to who you are collecting, who you are patroning, who you are gifting to, is also part of our collective community's art canon, right? And you don't have to be donating to the MoMA. You could be donating to your community center. You could be giving back to your local college, university, your alma mater, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That one of the things that we emphasize at Artwork Archive is that everyone's story needs to be recorded and shared for posterity and for legacy purposes, because we are all part of our own cultural heritage. And this slide has a lot of words, and for those that are thinking about documenting their legacy, we have an article on this, and I'll share it after the presentation along with the recording, but just thinking about how to inventory your artwork. And so here's some of the steps that we recommend, but Manuelita, I know you are documenting your artworks. You have your RFPs, your public art proposals. Charlie, you have your process within Artwork Archive. Keisha, your experience with an institution. If there's any tips or great big takeaways that you want people to know when just thinking about, wrapping their hands around the process and their works.
For me, I think we've kind of already addressed it.
Cool.
Because again, it would be wonderful to have one source to go to get information about any particular artist or any particular educator of art or any curator or institution. That would be another thing, is like, how do we find information on how this institution was founded and who were the original members? That kind of history. When we talk about art organizations that have existed, where can we find that information at? And it would be great if that existed. And if it doesn't, then I could see that as being another service offered, so that I can look up an organization like the Afro Cobra or the Spiral Group, and there is something that I can pull offline that has all the information with all these legendary artists that were a part of that, and it's available there. I don't know who would handle that, but those kinds of things would be major. Because with my wife doing the research that she does, she often has to travel the world to do her research. Wouldn't it be great to have one source that you can go to, and there it is?
Yeah. And speaking of sources, I have a screenshot from a book from Simone Lewis that you gave Keisha to just demonstrate that and give us a visual while we had this chat. And then Charlie, here you are. Well, speaking of a place to gather, that's one of the goals with Artwork Archive. We have many artists that are using the platform, and organizations like the Museum of African American Art that are inventorying and keeping a database, but then they are also making it public and accessible and discoverable, and to promote so that people can find information about artists, your bio, your artist statements, your collections, your bodies of artwork. And so wanted to spotlight that. And again, to say that everyone's artworks are worth being put out into the world. And so that we're hoping that artists more and more are documenting, inventorying, archiving, but then also making it public and consumable and viewable and understandable and preservable, like all the ables for our audiences of art enthusiasts and collectors and artists themselves to be inspired by.
I think another thing that I think becomes very important, if you think about it, is like how do you determine the value of your work? And as it increases, and I've gone through several levels of increase of the value of my work. And it's important to document a lot of that information, so that I now at times I will send people to Artwork Archive so you can kind of see a little bit about the history. You can Google me, but like when people start to ask, why is this valued at this? And, you know, there's records to indicate those gradual increases, and sometimes they're huge jumps. And why did it jump? Why did the price change like that? It's here. I can explain it to you, and you can see why. This information is all there. It's all accessible, and it needs to be.
Yeah. That's important. Yeah, the journey, the artists, we change our portfolios, we change our process, we change our prices. Yeah, exactly. And having that documentation down. I also wanted to spotlight another incredible artwork archive client, Tila Studios, based in Atlanta. They're a visual arts incubator empowering Black women artists to create and showcase their art, as it says in their brief description. This is a screenshot from their public profile. And I asked Tiffany Latrice, founder of Tila, to contribute a quote about what she thinks about when preserving Black artists' legacies, given the work that she does. So I'm going to read her incredible words. She said, while the amplification of Black creatives and their work have increased, especially over the past few years, the erasure of Black women visual artists' contribution to the art world still occurs. While Black women artists create typically from a place of resistance, Black women artists need to value their creative works that are birthed from that resistance. It's powerful. It's one thing to create and be brave and vulnerable to share, but it's another thing to document and archive in order to empower other artists that look like you. That's how we build a better ecosystem, not just building spaces that promote creativity, but sharing resources for those who archive their work. That's why platforms like Artwork Archive are so important and valuable at times like this, when artwork is commodified, stolen, and appropriated often. So yeah, that speaks really nicely to the conversations we've already had about creating space, and then, you know, within the description of this webinar, archiving being an act as well. I wanted to leave time for questions, and I see we have a few. Is there anything when thinking about preserving your legacy and what you have done, any challenges that you have faced in the past, anything that you can see the road coming in front of you when thinking about preserving your legacy? And then on the flip side, you know, let's not have everything be, you know, I'm a glasses half full, like opportunities as well, things that you're excited about when thinking about preserving your legacy.
I've been thinking about talking to a community college professor who teaches about curating and does a lot of shows, to find out whether or not it would be valuable for her students to work with me in documenting my inventory and documenting what has happened to works that I've done in the past. So I'm excited about the thought of again working with college students, which I did for some years, but when I was teaching them calculus and differential equations instead of working with them about documenting artwork.
Anything else before I proceed? All right. And I just have some screenshots. So this, Keisha, is a screenshot showcasing Palmer Hayden, which I know you have a very significant collection of their work, along with other artworks within your collection. And
we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of where the question and the long-term project of preservation comes in for us. It's not just digitizing the collections, which is it's its own project and its own task, making the images of the collection available, making documentation around the artist and his life available to the public and to researchers, but also preserving the works themselves. And so that's part of the process that we're in, is preserving the physical objects, the physical paintings that are in our collection, and coordinating the conservation work that's needed for all paintings of that type over time. And so we're kind of in that phase right now, in addition to the digitization, preserving the actual works and bringing in those experts who can do the conservation that's needed over time.
And that actually, when speaking of challenges, one that we see a lot at Artwork Archive, when I think of your incredible collection and the work you're doing with digitization, is just quantity, right? Especially because we're talking about not just the artworks, but about the papers and the documents and all of the other pieces that go into art making or art collecting. And so we understand it's a lot. Sometimes it can be like eating your vegetables. And so recommend is
it can be, but you know, I mean, and again, one of the biggest challenges for us was really finding an appropriate platform that would allow us to not only share images from the collection, but to also, you know, attach and upload and share documentation that's related to an individual piece or related to the entire collection. In this case, the Palmer Hayden collection, which is central to the museum's permanent collection, but we have a catalog from the original Palmer Hayden exhibit in 1988 at the Museum of African American Art. We're running out of those. That was a one print run. There haven't been any new editions of that. We're going to have a point where we don't have those available anymore. And so we want to, you know, be able to preserve the documents that are associated with the collections at the museum as well. And then in that respect, the idea of also being able to preserve records about the conservation work that's being done, to be able to have those kinds of updates all in one place on one platform, in addition to the images of the work, to have condition notes and to even have documents from the conservators who are working with the collection is a really big step for us. And it helps us feel that the task is less daunting because we have natural categories and places to put things. So we're appreciating that right now.
I like to say artwork ages just like us too. And so thinking about the how our artworks will live on, they will need to be taken care of just like us, you know, get a doctor's visit or a conservation studio visit. Words, speaking of documents, so here within this presentation, it's a little silly because I will just send you these articles to everyone who is attending. And if you're watching the recording, please feel to reach out or take note of these. But these are all listed on our blog, with the exception of at the bottom, I have a few resources from other incredible institutions that are doing legacy preservation work, like Surf Plus, as well as Joan Mitchell Foundation. But articles about preserving your legacy, articles about cataloging for institutions as well, and collectors. And just a little plug to say that we have a blog. We do these webinars, we have free e-guides, but we also contribute articles to our blog every week. And so if you're interested in a little weekend literature or evening literature, we have some helpful how-tos, but also some more long form articles. We have an incredible interview with Charlie from now, I think like 2+ years ago, but yeah. But yeah, we have interviews with artists, etc. I want to make sure that we take some time to address questions that have come in. Let me see. Can you share tips, guidance for digitizing many years of sketchbooks? And can you please share best practices for securing grants and partaking in collaborative efforts to learn how to manage building the archive? This question from Maria Scott. Do you want me to repeat the question, or do you feel like? So two-part.
Would that be more of a museum question, or is that an artist question?
It could be a museum question. Could you repeat the question? I'm not able to see it, so.
Yeah, exactly. So the first question, can you please share tips and guidance for digitizing many years of sketchbooks? And so I can actually address this one really quickly too, because I see a lot of institutions, but also artists, right? And when talking about reference materials, if you have a scanner at home or taking photos, I've seen people photograph everything and upload it into an archive. I've also seen institutions and individuals take photos of the cover and then some like reference images because that's another piece of the legacy being left behind is, are you going to be leaving behind boxes and boxes of sketchbooks? And what do you want to gather from that?
So for the sketchbooks, we are in the process of documenting and archiving other kinds of paper items that are related to the museum's history as an institution, and also related to the artists who have exhibited over the years, particularly artists in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and in a time period before digitization was an option. And so we have hard copies of things that have never been shared or never been publicized. So in terms of volume, I would, Elysian, to your point, I would strongly suggest that you do, as you're either photographing or scanning, that you do include those reference points, a cover, something that lets you know kind of I don't know how many sketchbooks you're talking about, if this is the tens or hundreds, but that you include a reference, and that you put aside being daunted by the volume of what you're doing, and understand that you have to take it, you have to categorize it, you have to take it, if it's book by book or year by year or theme by theme, but a way to sort of bite off smaller pieces of the project that you can feel that sense of accomplishment as you finish each category of that work. And again, strongly suggest whenever you're photographing, whenever you're scanning, that you do include some reference, or even take the time to label each file as you scan it. Because if you scan a large volume of images or documents and you don't have those points, and you're trying to go back and put it in order, or trying to go back and label it all in one mountain of images, that makes it more daunting than it probably needs to be.
And I know we're 1 minute of time, and it would be great to stay about five plus extra minutes to address some of these questions, because there's two others I would really bring to light. The second part of the question, I'll just say we actually have a number of grant opportunity articles at Artwork Archive. So not knowing if you're from an institution or an artist, I will send that in the follow-up as well. We have one for GLAM, so galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. And there's a number of grants for collection management. And then also there are archival grant opportunities, as well as other types of art opportunities for individual artists. And every year we put out a complete guide. And so actually it's going to be published very shortly before the end of the year for a complete guide to 2023. So I'll make sure to share those as well. I wanted to address a question. Can you share advice on gaining exposure as an artist of color beyond the Black season each year?
That's a very good question. Right now, it really is like utilize social media as much as possible. Like for me, I've had several clients come through me through Instagram, oddly. They may have Googled me after maybe following me or recommendations there. But I try to be present in almost any different medium that's out there. And that's how it's led to a lot of great opportunities. But I've also been doing this for a long time, so my name is dropped in a lot of different circles now. So it's fortunate that way. But I have an agent, Valerie Francis, who has the gallery, Nowhere's Gallery, and she handles a lot of the deals. She focuses on a lot of the deals for me. And that's been very important to me as an artist, because it's very difficult to wear both hats, being a creative person. Actually, several hats. Fortunately, I have a wife that's really taking charge of the archiving of my information. So I have her doing that because she really loves research. But then there's also Valerie, who handles a lot of the deals for me. And then as an artist, I can then simply focus on being creative.
And then I believe this question is for you, Keisha, from Lawrence Baker. Thanking everyone for the presentation. Does this institution archive art from Afro-American artists through America? Is the artist responsible for the cost of delivery to the institution? Very good nitty-gritty question.
The question is Is the artist responsible for delivery of
Cost.
archival material? Is it
Cost of
delivery
delivery,
of
maybe artworks and
for an
perhaps.
exhibit or for
Hmm.
are you, I'm
Donation.
not sure if the person is asking whether the museum archives work on behalf of artists or whether or this is an exhibit related question. So I'll try to answer. I answer both.
I was going to say, Lawrence, if you're listening,
I'll try to answer both.
Give us some
So when I was talking earlier in the session about artist files or artist records that the museum has, those records are specifically related to the museum's own history of artists who have exhibited at the museum. They're also related to Dr. Samela Lewis and her work as the founder, as an arts administrator, documents related to her work when she was there as the founding director, related to her colleague, Mary Jane Hewitt, who worked very closely with her during those founding years, documents related to our institutional history, but specific artist files, those artist files that the museum has and that we will be digitizing moving forward are related to people, artists who exhibited from the time that the museum was founded in 1976 to the present date. So there are resumes in some cases, there are contracts if an exhibit agreement was done and we happen to have kept those materials. There are old 35 millimeter slides from the time when that was the way that artists were showing their work initially to the museum. So when I'm talking about artist files and archives at the museum, I'm talking about artists with whom we already have a relationship. We don't offer archiving of artists' work as a service, or at least we haven't in the past. Archiving of artists, hard copy materials where we maintain those records for individuals who may not have had an exhibit at the museum or may not have had an affiliation with the museum over time. Does that?
That was fabulous. That was great. Yeah, and hopefully, if you have a further question within that, feel free to ask. I know we're past time, so I want to be knowledgeable and respectful of everyone's time. I forget who mentioned microchip your art, but Margaret's asking if we can further discuss microchipping your art.
I didn't mention it, but I've heard artists are now doing that, but I've never microchipped any of my work.
Gotcha.
List that was in a list on one of your slides. I noticed it too and wondered, what's that all about?
Oh, it was my slides. Oh, so the microchip. That's because, all right, great. I thought someone else mentioned it too. I can speak to it. So microchipping your art, Clark Hooling's foundation also had a presentation about preserving artistic legacies. And the conversation was around microchipping your art, take a photo of it before it goes off into the world. So thinking about when your artwork leaves your studio, how do you preserve that artwork and that information because you no longer tangibly have it. So that for that instance in that slide, I think you may need to, I need to have another cup of coffee. That example, the importance of photographing your art and making sure that you as the artist have record to it, because once it is out of your hands, you don't have, a tangible control of it. I thought someone else mentioned it too. So I was like, yes,
that's actually right. That's something that we are thinking and talking about as an institution too, because we have requests for things to travel, pieces that the other institutions would like to borrow for exhibits, and that concept of being able to keep track of things as they are moving, in and out of your sort of possession temporarily, your physical possession, is something that we've talked about, that idea of the microchipping.
Yeah.
And so I thought your idea that the concept of microchipping was much more than photographing, as I think Keisha is talking about. I thought about some little electronic device you're going to attach to things so that you can track it. And that's not.
And that's it. I mean, like I've heard people doing that. See, I have every piece of work that's comes out of my studio is professionally shot. I literally have a photographer that comes in, sets up lights and shoots, and that's how he's digitizing every image I produce. But there are actual artists that are putting a little chip on their work so that, you know, wherever it's going, it's being tracked. And I've never done that because usually I know once it leaves there where it's going.
And that's, to Charlie's point, that's what we were discussing too as an institution, was actually the tracking, physical tracking ability for those pieces that are coming and going. We don't have our collection is not large compared to other museums and other collecting institutions. And so we do though have a few requests right now for pieces to travel. And so it's something that we've talked about for those times when we do get that kind of request for things to actually go out of our collection and into another institution for an exhibit.
Exactly. And one question to leave us off with, but before I present it to the panel, I just want to address, Tina asked about, you know, how to create order within all of this inventory work, especially she inherited her mother's collection, artist Harriet Sebastian. Thank you for sharing. And so I actually have some information around a checklist of what to preserve, what to record, what to archive when thinking about, you know, is it the box of dungarees, overalls, you know, the pieces that were like the materials that were being used in the studio, worn, sketchbooks, sketches, receipts, notes, you know, how to make order of all of that along with the artworks. So all that being said, I will make sure to share that information as well. But to leave this panel with the last question of, how do all of you find balance as you scale and grow as a professional? It's good under.
I just have to take one day at a time. And years ago, I started teaching a concept to students that is not new. It's like, be here now. It's sort of do it now, be here now, that sort of concept. Be where you are when you're there. In other words, it's not helpful to be in the studio sculpting and planning dinner at the same time. And it's not helpful to be cooking dinner and be thinking about what you should be doing in the studio. You have to be where you are when you're there so that you attend to what you're doing. And I have to set alarms. I now use my phone to tell me it's time to leave the studio and go prepare dinner. So that the alarm tells me I have to stop. And I usually give myself a good 5 minutes before for the alarm to go off. But that's my motto, is not try to be in two places at once. I don't always succeed, but that's how I try to manage it.
Okay. For me, it's really important that I almost have a 9 to 5. I come in at a certain time pretty much every day, and I leave at a certain time every day. And I have absolutely, meaning zero art supplies at home. I have a studio space, and when I'm there, I'm an artist, and when I leave, I'm not. And so I think that's one of the ways I create balance. And I also intentionally decide at times of the year to take a break. And that means really taking a break. Because if I take my sketchbook with me and I take my paints with me or something, I'm not going to be on break. And so, and in family always comes first. And so it's always being reminded of that. And my young nephew reminded me recently when he stopped by, they were driving by and they saw my car by the studio. And I said, anytime you want to come by, family comes first. And they popped in, and my niece apologized because my little nephew said, no, he said, come. And he said, you know, I said, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And I was busy at the time and I stopped because he corrected me on what I'd said to him. And so it's really, you know, trying to focus on that balance is very important.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. I'm waiting for my toddler to like walk in right now. It's actually at school, but like if we hold for 15 more minutes, he'll probably pop in.
I don't
Keisha,
know. Was that question for the artist or was that for the
and
arts
arts professionals
administrator?
too, all of
Okay.
us, yeah.
So you know what? I like one of the things that I'm enjoying about being able to do tours at the museum right now by appointment is that we really get a chance to talk to people
Mm.
and connect with people. They get a chance to connect with the art. And there's a lot of honesty that happens. So I want to share some of that honesty with you. And I have no way to pretend that things are in balance right now for me. When that shutdown happened, museums were closed for a year. The Museum of African American Art went into an extended shutdown, decided to do some inventory, got grant funding from California Humanities, do inventory, do upgrades, paint the place, do some renovations. I'm all in. And so I am sometimes just plain old out of balance on other stuff. But Charlie, to your question early in the webinar about how I came to be in this position, how I came to be affiliated with the Museum of African American Arts gift shop was my first job when I was a high school student. I worked there on weekends. And so I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Samela Lewis and to meet many of the former board members and many of the folks who had been holding the place up and holding the place together through the years. And so when it came to me to take on that role in 2020, mid 2020, during the shutdown of executive director, I had to be all in, and I still am, even when it means that things may be briefly out of balance. And so I'm on full tilt in the direction of making sure that the legacy of the museum and in that way, Dr. Samela Lewis's legacy continues and is there to be shared with the community moving forward.
Thank you. Well, that was the last question. I just want to say thank you to everyone who stayed past time to listen. And thank you to our three incredible panelists for sharing so openly and honestly and eloquently, and you were all engaging. I'll just be singing your approbations throughout. And for everyone here, I will be sending a recording tomorrow, along with a number of resources and articles and the websites of our panelists, all the great resources that are relevant to today's presentation. And thank you again to the panelists, to Manolita, to Charlie, to Keisha, and you all for staying tuned. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.